distinct honor and pleasure to have Haras Rafiq here. He's been with us for most of the years that we've been at Oxford doing our work and in New York. Haras is the managing director of the Quilliam Foundation. The Quilliam Foundation is dedicated, among many important things, to countering extremism. Haras has worked, he was at the cutting edge of raising awareness in the British society and now in other countries about political Islam, and as we say, not Islam or Muslims, but radical reactionary social movements that have occupied very important spaces in our democratic countries. And Haras and his colleagues have been fighting this effectively. And they fight not only extremism, but they've been at the forefront of fighting anti-Semitism. And this was, I think, a key component of our message here, how we should not only fight anti-Semitism, but also other forms of hatred. So it's really a distinct pleasure to have Haras with us again.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much. Thank you, Charles. Can everybody hear me okay with this mic? Yeah?
No,
Great.
it's only for the camera.
Oh, right. Okay. So I'll have to stand here then. Is that better? Okay, great. So as Charles said, my name's Haras Rafiq. I'm the chief exec of an organisation called Quilliam International. I want to tell you just a little bit more about Quilliam. Personal story for me. My apologies, some people who it's always lovely to see again have heard my story, why I'm doing this. And then I'm going to go into a presentation about the triple threat and how anti-Semitism is the fuel of the triple threat. And then I'm going to take ISIS and Islamist radicalisation really as case studies and how people get radicalised, what are the pathways, and how social media and various other mechanisms are used. So a little bit about myself. I'm 54 years old. I was born in the UK. I've just travelled down from Rochdale. Some of you may have heard of Rochdale as the home of the grooming gangs. A lot of bad things in Rochdale, some good things from Rochdale as well. My father came over to the UK in 1953. My uncles came over in the 20s from my mother's side. 65, I was born. And the story for my life really was that I was just minding my own business. I was somebody who was of Muslim origin, a Muslim, I am a Muslim, and somebody who really was, we were a minority, a very small minority in Rochdale in the 60s, 70s and early 80s, probably about 2 to 3% at school. And we had no choice really but to integrate. Keep the values that we have. Some of them were from Pakistan originally, and some of them were Islamic values, and we tended to keep them in the house. But once outside of the house, it was just doing what everybody else was doing. I was a punk rocker at the age of 14, 15, followed the different music fads, went to university. Islamism as a political ideology was not rife in universities. I went to UCL, and nobody tried to recruit me to Islamism in the early 80s. Got my degree, was living in the, a normal life, working in the commercial sector, was on the board of a number of high-profile, large corporate entities. And then my daughter came home, and this is about, so she's 22 now, this is when she was about 7. She came home one day and said, "Daddy, I don't want to be a Muslim." And I said, "Why don't you want to be a Muslim? What have we done to you? Why?" And she said, "Because Muslims are always angry and they're always killing people. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to kill anybody. I'm only 7 years old." And I asked her to show me where she was getting these messages from. And my children, she's got older brothers, were early adopters when it comes to technology, and they were getting emails and various things. She'd put on the news, there was the Taliban, and they were burning effigies of George Bush and Tony Blair, looking very angry, killing people. She didn't know anything about the religion. She saw Mummy and Daddy doing the things that Muslims do, fast during Ramadan, pray when we felt particularly pious or we were going through some form of depression or some problems. That's when people who believe in God actually search for God when they're having problems in a lot of cases. She didn't know anything about any of these issues. She just knew that she was associating the faith of Islam with these things. And she was being told by everybody, Muslims and non-Muslims, that this is Islam. And it was totally alien to the Islam that I was raised with. So I sort of left got some time off work, travelled around the world, and realised that I came full circle. The faith that my father and the immigrants from the 40s, 50s and 60s brought to this country, where there was no political ideology on the back of their faith. They were social economic migrants, most of them. And this was the case for Muslims and many Muslims around the world, but there was something going on. And I wanted to do something about it. So I set up a company to pay the bills and did more research. And I remember I commissioned at the time from University of Salford, where I did my master's, my MBA, I commissioned a study of 1,500 Muslims across the UK, actually England and Wales, not Scotland, and their attitudes and beliefs towards certain things. And this was the largest survey at the time ever done. And good demographics, almost an equal mix, male to female, good age range, and lots of interesting information lots of interesting data came from that. But there's one answer to one question that frightened the life out of me. And the question was an open question. And the question was, name a Muslim role model. 1,500 people interviewed. Some people said the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Some people said Muhammad Ali, the boxer. Some people said a whole bunch of other sports stars who happened to be Muslim. Some said parents. But 4.9% of the people surveyed said Osama bin Laden. And I didn't know what to do with this. And by the time this study was completed and we had the results, it was around about 2004. So I ended up in front of managed to get to the government, and in those days they had something called engaging with the Islamic world in the Foreign Office, as if there is such a thing. There is no such thing as an Islamic world. There are Muslim majority countries, and many of them don't think the other ones are Muslims, and a whole bunch of other things. But I went to them and I said, look, here are my findings, lots of other things, but this is frightening me. And I found the response very patronizing. It was almost sort of, there, little boy, don't worry. We know what we're doing. And I said, look, I think we're going to have a 9/11 in London, on the UK. And they said, don't worry, we won't have one. Don't worry, we're not like the Americans. We talk to our extremists. We talk to Abu Hamza. We talk to all of these people. And they don't want to do something here, they want to do something over there. And don't worry, as long as they're sitting here, they won't be able to do anything there. So I kind of sort of, left it. I was still in my 30s at the time, late 30s, maybe early 40s. I turned 40 nearly. And I thought, okay, they know what they're doing. 7/7 happened, and I found myself within 24 hours in Downing Street advising the then Prime Minister Tony Blair on these issues, and I ended up on the government task force that came up with the response to the preventative response to 7/7, the attacks in London. And some of you may have heard of the CVE strategy, Countering Violent Extremism. It's in the US. It's worldwide now. It originally was the PVE strategy, and we wrote it in London in 2005, 2006. And there's lots of holes in it, and I'll share with you. So I sort of became an advisor to a number of politicians, Home Secretaries, Secretaries of State, and then when it was the Conservative Party, I found myself with David Cameron, Michael Gove, and a whole bunch of other people. But about 5 years ago, I joined Quilliam. And Quilliam was set up as an organisation where the president of the organisation used to be a senior commander for Osama bin Laden in the war against the Soviets. And he left Al-Qaeda in 1999, I think it was, when in a cave in Kandahar, Zawahiri and bin Laden told all of their lieutenants that they were going to target American assets. And he stood up, and the whole Libyan contingency, for whom he was the commander, stood up with him and basically said, you're wrong, that's not what I joined up for. The Americans saved my life when we were fighting on many occasions, trained me many occasions when we were fighting the Soviets. I didn't join for this reason, I'm out. And bin Laden and Zawahiri debated him on a one-to-one basis for nearly a week to try and stop him, because he took the rest of the Libyans with him and many other people. And now he spends his time, he's disavowed the ideology and theology, he spends his time, mostly for Quilliam, as the president of Quilliam, at the hard end of counter-terrorism, working in the Middle East in a number of countries. We deployed him and a team when ISIS declared the Islamic State. So he deals with the hard end. Then we have the founding chairman, Majid Nawaz, who spent 5 years in Mubarak's torture chambers because he used to be an Islamist. He used to be a senior member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, and he was trying to get a military coup in Egypt. And post 9/11, he was rounded up and he was a political prisoner. And that's where he read Animal Farm for the first time. That's where he went through a process of critical thinking. 7/7 happened, being a Londoner. I'm not, he was a Londoner. And by the time he was out 5 years later, he fell out. He didn't really believe in the ideology anymore. So they set up Quilliam, I joined them, and Quilliam really now has 3 offices, one in London, actually 4. One in London, one in DC, one in LA, and another one in Toronto. And we work around the world doing a whole bunch of different things. So that's just a little bit of background just to give you some indication of where I'm coming from on this. We talked a lot about ideology. You probably heard a lot about ideologies, but ideologies are important. In a quote in the Australian Quarterly, Ivan Menzies wrote that ideologies decide the life or death of nations. That's important, especially when you bear in mind ISIS tried to declare the Islamic State the nation, and Al-Qaeda and other groups still think of themselves as a global ummah, a nation as far as they're concerned. He also said that a nation without an ideology is lost. If it's false, it's a danger to the nation and the neighbours. And a nation, perhaps a little nation with a true and positive ideology, may bring a light to the world. That's something that's stuck with me ever since I first came across it. And the other one really is around ideologies containing beliefs which shape our view of why things happen. They give us values which govern our sense of worth and self-respect, and prescriptions about the appropriate form of social relationships with others. When you saw people from ISIS beheading people that they considered not to either be the true kind of Muslim or disbelievers, or they say unbelievers, the correct word is disbelievers, that's what it was, the brainwashing. And together, these elements shape our perceptions of both who or what it is and what we might become and might be. So I won't go through the whole quote, but these are quotes that really shaped my way of thinking on a lot of things. We're talking about the triple threat and extremism. And one of the biggest problems for the UK government and other governments around the world is how do you define extremism? Is there a legal definition? Well, nobody's come up with one yet. But the definition that I use, and we use, is that extremism is the desire to enforce illiberal views, whatever they are, which are in dichotomy to the liberal values that we would like to adhere to in a liberal secular democracy. And you can have non-violent and violent forms. Extremism isn't always Islamist. It's also the triangle that you see there. The far right or the far left. And Islamists at the top, with being a theocracy. The labels, I don't like the labels far right and far left anymore. And I'll tell you why. The reason why I don't like the far right is historically, especially in Europe, we associate somebody being far right as fascism and white supremacy, or white supremacism. There are many people that now in that space who are of colour, brown, black, a whole, maybe Chinese, a whole different colours. So I like the word right, far right populism. That's the phrase that I go with. Because you can be right of centre and not be a populist or I think an extremist. But the far left, I don't like that either. Because I think it's incomplete. Sorry, I've just been told I'm too close to the microphone. Is that better? Yes. Sorry. But I think the term far left is incomplete as well. Because there are people who are left of centre who will join. Some of you may have seen the documentary last night, Panorama, on the BBC. If you haven't seen it, download it while you're in the UK on BBC iPlayer, and I recommend you watch it. And there are people on the left, who may be quite left, who aren't racist and who aren't, extremists. And they're different from people who are further to the left, people like Seamus Milne, the Director of Communications for Jeremy Corbyn, people like Jeremy Corbyn himself, who we call the regressive left. And you'll find that anti-Semitism is one of the things, it's not the only thing, but anti-Semitism is one of the things that the theocrats, the Islamists at the top, the far-right populist, and the far-left regressive left have in common. It's one of the key fuels that they will use, and I'll show them in the pathways, to radicalize people to their worldview and polarize societies. Let's just take the first one, Islamism. It's not a made-up word. Some people on the left will say, or the regressive left will say, people have just made that up. People on that's not a real word, it's, people who are not the right kind of Muslim, or people who are, in inverted commas, Islamophobic, will use that word. People on the right will say, you know what? There's no such thing. It's all of Islam. You can only be a Muslim if you practice the same form of Islam that Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hizb ut-Tahrir, Hezbollah from a Shia perspective. That's the only right kind of Islam. But the word Islamism comes from the Islamists themselves. The Muslim Brotherhood, when they came up with their ideology, they called themselves Islamists as their ideology and Islamism as the type of religion they practice, as opposed to the ordinary Muslims in Egypt at the time who were different to them. They wanted to differentiate themselves from other Muslims. And by the way, some of you may have just heard me say Islamophobia in inverted commas. You guys, have you guys come across the term Islamophobia? Yeah. Can I just have a show of hands of people who think that Islamophobia is a correct term that people should be using? Just one person? A few, okay. As a Muslim and somebody who deals with this, I can tell you it's not. And let me tell you why. Islam is a set of ideas, a set of values. I choose to follow an interpretation of Islam. I choose to be a Muslim. I can't choose the colour of my skin. In a liberal secular democracy, no set of ideas, no set of values, even if I find them offensive, because offence is taken, not given, even if I find them offensive, no ideas should be beyond critique. But no individual should be beneath dignity. That's why we use the term anti-Muslim hatred. That's real. That's against individuals. That's discrimination against individuals. If somebody wants to discriminate against my faith, fine. I have a number of options. I can debate them if I want to. I can take offense and say, whatever. Fine. People have been doing that in liberal secular democracies for a long time. The life of Brian is just one example where Christianity has been ridiculed. So anti-Muslim hatred is the correct terminology to use, and you'll find a whole bunch of people, especially the Islamists and their fans, who will try and make the term Islamophobia popular, because the ideas and values that they stand for are the ones that are being critiqued, so it's used as a shield. As a Muslim, I was once no platformed at Warwick University. I and the organisation Quilliam had set up an event at Warwick University for the LGBT society called Religion. I can't remember what it was called, but it was around how people of faith can actually accept people who are LGBT, not discriminate them, and how it's okay from a theological perspective, historically, to do that, from an Islamic perspective and others as well. And it was packed. I think there was about 90 to 100 people there in 100, and no, actually there was more because there were people standing. The LGBT Society of Warwick no platformed me because they said I was Islamophobic. Because I had stood up against Islamists. So what is Islamism? And what's the difference between Islam and Islamism? Because there is a difference. In the same way there's a difference between social and socialism. Social is the way that we interact. Socialism is a distinct political ideology that happens to be left of centre. Islam is a religion practiced by many people in different ways. People in Saudi Arabia don't think people in Pakistan are Muslim. People in Pakistan, on the whole, the Brahmins don't think Saudi, and Saudi Arabia, they do it's the same. They practice it in different ways. Islamism is the distinct political ideology that Sayyid Qutb, who's the modern father, imported, and some of you may, if you haven't already, will learn about the Mufti, the Grand Mufti of Al-Aqsa at the time of Hitler, and I'm sure somebody will talk about it if they haven't already. I won't go into that. But Qutb imported fascism and communism from Europe and said, you know what, I like all of these ideas, but instead of doing it for the country, instead of for the state, instead of doing it for the people, let's do it for God. He brought in the God factor. Islamism wants really three things, and there's Islamism from a Sunni perspective and Islamism from a Shia perspective as well. But they all three want three things. The first thing, to set up a utopian state and enforce their version of fiqh, jurisprudence, that comes from Sharia. Enforce Sharia as state law. It's never been done in 1400 years until the last century, it's never been done in just under 1400 years of Islamic history, jurisprudence. State law on everybody, the same state law. Secondly, what it wants to do is to spread that state around the world until they see God's flag, as far as they're concerned, on every part of the earth. And the third thing, wipe Israel off the map. That's the three things at the top level that Islamism wants. Islamism is the ideology. Jihadism is the desire or the actual support for violence to achieve an Islamist objective. The word jihad means to struggle. It can be used in many different ways. The word for holy war is harb al-muqaddasa in Arabic. It's not in the Quran. But the word jihad and jihad derivatives are, and there are certain passages that do reflect to fighting, but there are many more that don't, which means it's all about the context. Jihadism, though, is there's use of violence to support Islamism. And then there's how you feel about, other Muslims. Up until Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab in the 1800s popularized Wahhabism, or sometimes we call it Salafism now. The way that Muslims on the whole viewed other people who weren't Muslims was totally different. The word kafir does not mean unbeliever. It doesn't mean non-Muslim. It means disbeliever. It means somebody who actually knows the truth. It comes from the root verb to conceal. Somebody who knows the root noun to conceal. Somebody who knows the truth and then hides it. People who were Christian, Jewish, or Zoroastrian or whatever were called disbelievers. They were called Ahl Kitab, and only certain other Muslims were called disbelievers. But the reality was, the true interpretation was only God can call somebody a kafir, nobody else. There's no such thing as Sharia law. You will not find Sharia, or rather the word law with Sharia, in the Quran or the Hadith anywhere. Qanun is the word, Arabic word for law. Sharia is a noun in the Quran, in Arabic, and in Arabic and sort of in the Hadith and the Quran as well. It's not an adjective. What we do find is fiqh, jurisprudence. That's why I used it earlier on. Al-Azhar University, the oldest Islamic university from a Sunni perspective in the world, has recognized over 400, so far, legitimate versions of fiqh, jurisprudence, all different, slight differences. The minute an individual takes Sharia, which is a personal code, the road to the oasis is the literal interpretation of Sharia. Oasis signifying purification, closeness to God. The word fiqh, the minute is used, and the minute any individual takes the Quran and Hadith and derives law from it, it becomes that person's interpretation. There are four main ones in the Sunni traditions, two main ones in the Shia, and then there's Wahhabism and Salafism and a whole bunch of other things as well. We heard me use the word Salafi, and Salafis can usually be seen with their trousers above their ankle, with long beards and dressing in non-Western clothes. And there are three distinct types of them: quietist, revolutionary, and jihadist. The quietists are the ones a bit like the Amish community. They'll get on with their own lives. They won't try to impose their views on anybody else, and they will try and live in isolation and separate to the rest of the community, even other Muslims, unless it's to convert them. But they won't really, and they'll hold views that are disgusting and abhorrent, but they won't actually come out with those views. They'll just decide it's okay to believe them inside. Then you've got the revolutionaries, and they are the ones you'll see on street corners with stalls, with a whole bunch of other things, and they will try and actively make change happen, but usually, initially, certainly through non-violent ways. Then you've got the jihadists and the global Salafi jihad that bin Laden wrote. In the Shia traditions, there's various. I won't go into them too much, I'm sure, unless you want to in questions afterwards. Then you've got the regressive left. That's Islamism. What do I mean by regressive left, the triple threat? I call them head-in-the-sand liberals that live in denial about Islamism, and they claim Islamophobia. So I also think it's sort of almost neo-Orientalism as well, and almost the bigotry of low expectations. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is they'll accept things from Muslims because certain Muslims will tell them this is what they believe, and that could be homophobia, that could be anti-Semitism, that could be a whole bunch of other things, but they may not accept them from other people. And the only thing they'll think is they're the natives don't know any better. That's the regressive left. They will stifle the debate, and they are in bed with Islamism right now. And I believe initially, I'd like to believe that some of the people that actually went down this journey from the far left, initially, not now, did it for good reasons. They didn't want to be racist or xenophobic, that we don't understand these people, they're exotic, etc., etc. Okay, this is what they're telling them, that they're being marginalised, it's blah, 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 and we will just help them. I would like to believe that's how it started, but maybe not. Their ideology is inconsistent. They are the far left now. If you look at momentum that is actually running the Labour Party right now, they are far left. It's the old communism. But that doesn't surprise me, because Qutb, the ideologue of modern-day Islamism, before he became an Islamist and before he sort of started practicing his faith a lot more, he was a Marxist. That's where he originally came from. He admired Hitler and fascism, but it doesn't surprise me that they will lift, because there's a lot. I used to do some training for the civil service in the UK many years ago. And I used to put on a flip chart on the left-hand side, I used to put about 9 different grievances. World peace, equality, a whole bunch of different things. And just say, here's a marker. Go mark off the ones you actually feel strongly about. They'd all get marked. Then I revealed the other side, the 13 grievances of Osama bin Laden for the global Salafi jihad, and 9 were there. So it's interesting, and our civil service, I don't know if it's like that in the US and maybe not in all countries, is historically right of centre, centre-right. Sorry, left of centre, centre-left. That's just the way it is, organically grown. So it's not surprising that there are some similarities as well. And the far left, the regressive left, will be vocal to tell you that I'm not a proper Muslim, that somebody who doesn't believe in the word Islamophobia, somebody who doesn't believe in the global caliphate, may not want to achieve it, someone who doesn't believe all of these things, is actually not a proper Muslim. After the attacks in Manchester, I went on the rampage on a Spectator podcast. You can find it online, where I just missed the Manchester bomber literally by half an hour. I was at the train station, and my daughter was meant to be at that concert, but she sold a ticket because she couldn't get out of her. She was doing placement in a hospital at the time and couldn't get out of the shift, but she sold a ticket. And Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, had gone on, part of the far left. If you watch the panorama video and you see the bit where they announced Jeremy Corbyn as the new leader of the Labour Party, he's the first person to stand up 2 people or 3 people to his right. He's the mayor of Manchester. He went on every single media channel he could go on to say, the attacker, the bomber, the terrorist was not a Muslim. I was my blood was boiling. I just went on this podcast, basically ripped into him, called him Sheikh Burnham, who's issued a fatwa to tell me and other people who is a Muslim and who's not. The guy was a Muslim. He believed in a certain interpretation of Islam. I don't believe in it. The majority don't, but he did. The only way you can become a Muslim is to say, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. That's it. You don't have to do anything. You're a Muslim. And the rest you can do things, believe, don't, but whatever. That's between you and God. That's not what the Islamists believe. And we've got the far right. And they will say that the only true Muslims are the ones that ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hizb ut-Tahrir, all these groups, the only true Muslims are the ones that actually believe what they believe because they've read, guess what, a Saudi, Wahhabi, Salafi, mixed with Muslim Brotherhood translation of the Quran. You walk around London now, you want to go and buy an English translation of the Quran, 99% of the time it'll be a Saudi, when they liked the Muslim Brotherhood interpretation, translation of the Quran. In the very first section, it talks about Surah Fatiha, their interpretation, their translation, then interpretation. Jews and Christians were cursed and hated by God. It doesn't say it in the words of the Quran, in their translation at the bottom, tafsir, that's how they translate it. The far right think, I'm an expert in the Quran, I'm an expert in the Hadith, and they'll fire all these things out at people. What do you think of passage, verse number this? And I'll say, okay, in English, okay, I'm going to say it in Arabic. I'll say it in Arabic, and they say, no, this is it. I said, no, that's wrong. Your translation is wrong. If you want to learn about the Quran, go and learn Arabic. And then go and learn Arabic from 1400 years ago, because I bet you can't still even read a Shakespearean play and tell me what it means. That's why 1400 years of classical scholarship, some good, some not so good, but yeah, let's be honest, is something that the Islamists want to get rid of. And the far right think that that's what real Islam is. They claim to be anti-Islam and not anti-Muslim. Well, they're anti-Muslim by the very fact that they're telling me I'm not a Muslim unless I believe what Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all these Islamists believe. They'll attract people from the left, people who voted most of their lives for Labour in the UK, for the left, for socialist parties. On this issue, they'll attract them. On this issue and Brexit are the two things that they will attract people. After the Manchester bombing, I got phone calls. Tommy Robinson, you may have heard of, he wanted me to speak at it. I said, no way. And then I got phone calls from friends of mine who all their lives had voted Labour, were going to the march and trying to beg me to speak at the march. They couldn't see how it was not anti-Muslim. But there's a fear. And now they are, some of them, paying money, £10 a month or whatever it is, to actual organisations and individuals that are anti-Muslim. They can't see it. They claim to be friendly to the Jewish diaspora. They're not. They want the same things that they've always wanted. They hate people who are Jewish, people who are brown, people who are Muslim, whatever, just as equally as each other. But what they'll do is, they'll put this facade on about, we recognise Israel, therefore most Jewish people will like us. That's the tactic they're using. They're gaining support. Katie Hopkins is a big one here. Ezra Levant is a big one in Canada and the US. There's a whole bunch of these people. You'll see them everywhere. I'm talking about actual not people who have just been labelled, because society at the moment is very quick to label people. I'm talking about actual people who are anti-Muslim. And then we've got the counter-jihad movement that they're picking from as well. And it's a political horseshoe. You know, you take some of the views that the Islamists have. They say the West is at war with Islam. That's what the Islamists say. Take the same view. And by the way, the far left will say that. Many in the far left will say that as well. Take the same view, rotate it just by 180 degrees, and they'll say Islam is at war with the West. It's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. But they all believe that ours, from their perspective, is the noble cause. Whether it's God Squad, whether it's the far left, regressive left, or the far right. They all believe they're doing it on the right side. And it's a bit like, the left eye is covering itself up when it comes to anti-Semitism and Islamism. The right eye is bursting a blood vessel. And the theocrats say they've got heavenly support from above. That's what we're seeing right now. So what is society doing? What are governments doing? Well, the CVE strategy is something I mentioned earlier on, the Countering Violence Extremism strategy, that hasn't had the political consistency since its inception that it should have had. In the UK, Tony Blair backed it, Ruth Kelly backed it, Hazel Blair's backed it. Then we've got Gordon Brown, who was took over from Blair. He certainly didn't back it. He got rid of all the stuff that Blair had done. And then we got the coalition government, the Lib Dems and some people in this Conservative Party, Baroness Warsi and others, didn't back it. It was a mess. It still is a mess. Our failed strategy in 2009, which we've changed about 3 times since then, Quentin Wiktorowicz took it to the US under Obama, and they called it the CVE strategy. Here we call it, we've separated the two. We call it prevent, and we call it countering extremism now. It's changed. What does it mean? If you take the curve as views of Muslims towards extremism and terrorism, at any given time you'll find X% support, actually support ISIS, Al-Qaeda. And by the way, right now we've been talking about ISIS a lot. It won't be in a year's time. We'll be talking about the next, whatever's next in a few years' time. And people talk about ISIS-inspired extremism. 10 years ago, we were talking about Al-Qaeda-inspired extremism. In between, we've talked about Boko Haram-inspired extremism. They did not inspire extremism. Extremism inspired them. It's a key difference. Very, very important. The ideology of groups like the Jamaat Islami from India and the Muslim Brotherhood from Egypt inspired these organizations. So here he was a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood. He was in prison at one time with, and the current leader of the Muslim Brotherhood were in prison at one time with the chairman of Quilliam. And they would debate. And the reason why they went off to set up Al-Qaeda was they felt that, we need to make that step to violence because, we believe in everything, but the only way to achieve what the Muslim Brotherhood believe in is to use violence. That's a simple step, and I'll show you that. But X% will support. Y% will sympathize. Sympathy means I don't support violence, I don't like those organizations, I don't support them directly, but I want to achieve what they want to achieve. Hizb ut-Tahrir, Muslim Brotherhood, Jamaat Islami, a whole bunch of different other organizations. Z%, empathy. Don't support the organizations, don't want to even actually achieve the same things, but they understand why they're doing it. Just I can't remember the exact figure, I'm going off memory. It's a figure in between 34 and 44% of British Muslims surveyed in a Guardian poll after the Charlie Hebdo attacks said, we understand why they did it. The shortest time, and I'm going to give you, because we're being filmed, I'm assuming this is not Chatham House, so I will give you open source information only. I thought it might be the case. You'll see my bio online, up until, that's fine, it's fine. It's only a small little thing. So up until about 8 months ago, I was an advisor to Europol as well. And my time came up after 3 years or whatever it was, and I didn't reapply to become an advisor. I just didn't have the time. But my dotted line boss at the time was a guy called Gilles de Kerkhove, who was the head of counterterrorism for Europol. He said, in an open forum, I was sat next to him, and I cringed, and that's why I can use this now. I can't use the actual figure, which is less. But he said the shortest time he's observed people who've been monitored as having empathy to actually becoming operational as a jihadist terrorist is 2 weeks. In 3 cases that I've worked on myself, it's been shorter than that. There is a guy called Ziamani who is locked up in a prison in the UK. I think he got sentenced to 22 years about 2 years ago. He was on his way with a bag, a machete and a hammer looking for either Jews or looking for either soldiers to actually stab and kill. Luckily, he was being monitored, or other people were being monitored, and he was, breaking up these cells and breaking up and stopping a terrorist attack is a combination of good intelligence and luck as well. And luckily, other people in the people he was mixing with were being monitored, and somebody saw him going out with his bag. They stopped him, and he wasn't able to do it. So the terrorist attack was foiled. 22 years, 2.5 months before he got arrested, he was Christian. He wasn't even a Muslim. So this can happen quickly, or it can take longer. It can take longer as well. I'm just giving you some of the worst case, shorter scenarios. When people have been identified in that space, there needs to be an intervention. There are 3 types of intervention. And by the way, in the US and other countries, most of the countries, apart from the countries like Norway, Holland, UK, are the only Western countries that I can recall off the top of my head that actually use all 3 of these. All the US does is arrest. All France does is arrest. All Germany does arrest. You can't arrest somebody really for having sympathy because they haven't committed the crime. For empathy. So they wait until the person goes to X%. But what we do in the UK is if they're in that space, if they're in support, they're about to become operational after monitoring, sometimes it's good to, if it's in a safe environment to monitor because you can arrest more people, arrest them. If they show sympathy through the PREVENT program and channel, we will try to de-radicalize them. If it's empathy, we'll try to rehabilitate them. We do that in schools and a whole bunch of other places. But the true way forward, and this was what the PREVENT strategy, the CVE strategy, was meant to be from the beginning, and I say that as somebody who was involved in writing it, but our politicians let us down. The real, true success, if we want to fix this problem, is how do we move that graph to the left? Two weeks is too short a time. It takes 22 people in the UK from an intelligence agency to monitor one person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 22 people, factoring holidays, shifts, a whole bunch of different things. That's been growing because for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years or whatever, all we've been doing is focusing on the right-hand side. And by the way, if you look here, what happened under Obama, and by the way, lots of things I like President Obama. If I was American, I probably would have voted for him, even though my politics isn't. I'm centre-right or centre-left. I've voted for everybody in my time. But what he did, and what Gordon Brown did in this country, and what the coalition did, they took people in the sympathy space and used them to de-radicalise the people who were showing support. Australia did. I had the same conversation with the Home Secretary in Australia. And he said, Harris, our strategy is about containment, not prevention. Stopping an attack. Well, if you use people in the sympathy space, they're not going to move anybody further back from what they believe in. If it's the empathy space, that's as far back as they can go. And if 2 weeks is the minimum time, no wonder when ISIS declared the Islamic State, thousands and thousands of people from Western countries, Muslims, went and joined them. Because they were being primed. They were being told, be a sympathizer, don't be a supporter, by the people who are sympathizers. Go and, don't blow yourself up here, it's haram. Because you know what, we have a covenant, don't do it here. The minute ISIS declared the Islamic State, Abu Bakr declared himself the caliphate, off they went. I'm not surprised. We need to build resilient communities, and that's the soft end of prevention. That's where civil society comes into play. That's where we treat Islamism, as an example here. I'd hope, I say this phrase, I've been saying this phrase quite a lot over the last 10, 12 years, but I don't feel comfortable saying it anymore. I used to say, we need to treat Islamism in the same way that we treat communism or fascism. But we don't deal with either of those two in a society. What's happening right now, we're not dealing with fascism and communism either, as I mentioned with the far-right populism and the regressive left. But we need to do more And as a society, all aspects of civil society have a role to play in building resilient communities, not just governments. So what are the pathways? I'm using Islamist jihadism as an example, but the pathways for far right and far left are more or less the same. 3 parts to it, and I'm going to go to the next slide when I go into the middle part. There has to be a grievance of some sort, and that can be genuine, partial, or perceived. You need charismatic recruiters to bring people by push and pull factors into a lens in the middle, the ideology, that focuses on the intellectual, ideological, social, emotional, and spiritual aspect. And the behaviours I'll talk about in the next slide. They will help people find a solution to their problems and then drive them on the right-hand side to 4 very, very dangerous things. The grievances. Every single person in this room, when we go home to our own beds tonight and we're on our own and we're falling asleep, we'll probably think of a problem that we've got. And my problem to me is much bigger than your problem. It's huge. It might really be insignificant, but my problem is huge to me. And it might go away itself in a week's time, who knows? If we just focus on the grievances, like some people on the left will tell us that we need to do, all we're doing is playing whack-a-mole, because this problem is grievances all the time. Let me give you an example of a genuine personal grievance. The lead bomber of the 7/7 bombings, Sadiq Khan, as opposed to the mayor, not the mayor of London. Sadiq Khan, he just happens to share the same name. He was brought up in a Sufi household. He was, very moderate, liberal. Well, maybe not so liberal, but relatively speaking, compared to the Wahhabis and Salafis. He was integrated into society. He went to university. He had a girlfriend for 3 years nearly, who happened to be Muslim, that he wanted to marry. He went home to his father and said, I want to marry her. He said, no, you can't. Your promise to your cousin in Pakistan, who you've only seen twice, but when you were born, I promised my sister that you would marry her daughter. That's who you're going to marry. It's Asian origin. He had a problem. It was a huge problem. He was in love. It wasn't foreign policy. He was in love. Nobody could fix the problem for him. Al-Muhajirun guys, Anjem Chowdhury's people, they were actually working off the back of his street, the God Squad is what they called them locally. And they were moving along, people who were prostitutes from streets, etc. They bumped into, he saw them a few times, and he just said, brother, we can help you fix your problem. Go back to your father. Quote this hadith. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, when looking for a partner, suitable partner, a match, a mate, the first thing you should look for is piety. Second thing is piety. Third thing is piety. That's a hadith. And then other aspects of the Quran. So basically they taught him to use the Quran and hadith back on his father, and the father had nothing and didn't want to go against God. Eventually he said, okay, marry her. Gardner said, in a commercial world, that a customer is 25 times more likely to buy again from a supplier if there's been a problem and they've fixed it. We knew this in the 90s, late 90s. I remember from a commercial world. These guys, they fix a problem and he now has a new family, a new group that actually fix problems for him. Great. Into the lens he goes. A partial grievance is a grievance based on a partial truth. There are aspects of British foreign policy, as a Brit I can say that I don't like. I marched against the Iraq War too. I didn't like it. I even told Tony Blair at the time, I know boss, I know I'm doing all this, advising you as a consultant, I'm not a civil servant, but I disagree and I'm going marching. And he was great about it. And nearly 1 million people marched in London. I spent most of my time in a coffee shop, but because it was really slow. Imagine 1 million people trying to walk. But I was there. If foreign policy was the cause, the real cause, why aren't there 1 million jihadists? And the second thing is, if foreign policy was the cause for jihadists, why did thousands of people from Europe, Muslims, travel to Iraq and Syria to go and kill other Muslims? The reality, though, is it is a partial truth and it is used as a recruiting sergeant. And then you've got perceived grievances. And these are grievances that don't actually exist. The government is anti-Muslim or Islamophobic. An example of this is a guy that we helped to de-radicalise when he was, and rehabilitate, when he was a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir. He was on a train one time, and it was his job to recruit, or one of his jobs. He saw a young woman with a hijab on, ding, 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 Muslim. She had a child. She's reading a paper, and the front page, the story is, some celebrity found guilty for paedophilia. He quickly, because these guys are smart, he quickly recognized that at that moment in time, the mother must have, at least on a subconscious level, some concern for her child. And he approached her. Assalamu alaikum, sister. How are you? Wa alaikum salam, because you have to reply. You have to say wa alaikum salam or alaikum salam. Sister, look at this immoral, corrupt society. Look at this, the role models that are held up for people. You're never going to have safety for your child. You're never going to your child's not going to be able to grow up well. You'll be looking over your shoulder. What are you going to do if these are the role models? Come and join us. The Khalif, when we achieve it, will protect you. Protect your child. Fairness, social justice. She's still in Hizb ut-Tahrir, he's not. But he used it to bring it into the middle. In the middle, there are 7 key behaviours at the top level that these people try to achieve. And now it'll all make sense when I told you I'm not surprised that people went off to join ISIS. Steps 1 to 5, definitely, and 6 is the overlap, Islamists do. They preach and they try and get people to do. The first one is once you come into this lens, they try and create the otherization. That people inside the lens are one group and everybody else is an outsider. You'll see this. In Pakistan, they're not violent. They're not even necessarily Islamists. The second one is the collectivization. That everybody outside of that lens is the same. And that includes other Muslims. That's why you see the biggest number of victims of jihadist attacks are actually Muslims. Go to Pakistan, Data Sab. You'll see virtually every year there's Data Sab is a shrine. You'll see every year virtually an attack, suicide bombing, and hundreds of people will die at a time. And sometimes they're in coordination with 2 or 3 at the same time, and thousands of people will die at the same time. The third one is the oppression narrative. Once they've persuaded them that everybody outside the lens is the same and is the other, that people they're being oppressed. Everybody outside the lens is oppressing the people in the lens. Then you've got the fourth stage, the collective guilt, that even if people aren't directly involved in the oppression, the very fact that they're not in God's gang, the very fact they're not in the global Muslim Ummah gang, as they say, well, I say gang, they don't say gang, the very fact that they're not in this lens, by paying their tax, by whatever, they are complicit. Then comes the supremacism narrative. That everybody in the lens and the group is superior to everybody else. So far it's non-violent. It's Muslim Brotherhood. It's Jamaat Islami. And those groups are Hizb ut-Tahrir. The social aspects of Hezbollah, even though all of Hezbollah is the same, they will go out and use in society, civil society, they'll provide schooling, food, a whole bunch of different things, so people will join them and join this lens. Then you come to the violence, the violent bits. And this is where it overlaps a little bit. Number 6 is the self-defense narrative. Everybody in the lens must defend themselves. And finally, stage 7, violence is the only way. The self-internalization of violence. People who empathize or sympathize will take people to a minimum of 5. Sorry, to a maximum of 5, maybe 6. Usually, empathy will hover around about 1, maybe 2. Sympathy will go all the way up to 5, 6, and it's a support that goes 6, 7. And then they'll drive 4 main responses: set up the utopian Islamist state, fight for it, or fundraise for fighting. Go and join them. Become a bride. Let a guy who's a soldier have... Actually, they say 4 wives. They can actually have more. But that's a different story. because they can do a whole bunch of different things, misyar and a whole bunch of other things. Just struggle. The second one is theological justification. God wants you to do this. If you're not doing it, you are not doing what God wants you to do. Go and support this cause. Actively support it. Revenge. There are a number of people. We've had the war on terror for a long time now. And there are people whose aunts, uncles, family, friends have been affected. And for some of these people, revenge is what they're ultimately looking for. A bit like the IRA problem. I remember at school many years ago when I was a kid, we had to do a project on the IRA in Northern Ireland, the troubles in Northern Ireland. And I remember there was a program on ITV or somewhere, and they were interviewing people from the IRA, and I went and got my pencil and my pen and my book, and I thought, right, I'm going to get all of my research from this documentary. And there was one common theme when this kid was asked, why do you do what you do? And he said, well, because they killed my uncle. We've got elements of that. And the final one is mental health issues. There are people, there's a country in Scandinavia that we've done some work with who have identified that over 40% of their incarcerated Islamist jihadists are now diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. It's easier to actually move somebody down this process. And by the way, I remember a presentation, I was in DC, and this was around about 2007, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 6, somewhere around there, where there was a presentation done by somebody who actually at the time said in those days that Al-Qaeda were hacking medical records, trying to look for people, that they could actually actively go and recruit. If you look at one of the main videos of ISIS, where they've got 4 people sitting in front of a fire, the guy who's originally from Scotland talked extensively about the fact that he was depressed, and jihad, combative jihad, joining ISIS, was the only cure for his jihad. So these are the 4 key things that they will drive. One of the things we notice also with ISIS is the involvement of women a lot more. When Al-Qaeda were calling for people to come and fight, there were virtually no women. They didn't want women, they just wanted fighters. ISIS declared the Islamic State, and they were looking for everybody to come. We found that, depending on which country it is, in between 10 and 20% of Western countries saw women going in actively for the first time, supporting jihadist organizations. The drivers for them really were about empowerment, a way to, there were 4, a way to, and by the way, if you go on our website, you can find Caliphate. It's a report I co-wrote with one of my former colleagues on this, so I won't go into it too much. But empowerment, a way to demonstrate that they're just like men. Their souls are just like men and they can do things. There's the deliverance, go through the grievances, etc. The fact that they can actually do something. Grievances can be resolved by doing something. Then you've got participation. This is, come and join and actually play a part. And then piety. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but I won't talk that. Why is anti-Semitism so important to these people? So, this is strategic radicalization. To move somebody to a particular, the pathways and the 7 behaviors. To do that en masse, you need to have a strategy. There was a raid in a Muslim Brotherhood cell in Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken, and it was in the 90s, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty certain it was the 90s. A document, the strategy was found, and this is my interpretation of that strategy. First, you need to build capacity. You need to persuade Muslims that the faith that their parents believed in is wrong. 4 things: bid'ah, haram, shirk, and kuffar. Bid'ah, innovation; haram, not allowed; shirk, what the parents are doing, false association to a deity; and kuffar, their version, is taking people outside of the fold of Islam, what the parents are doing, wishing somebody a happy birthday, a whole bunch of other things. Lots of anecdotes, but I think I'm a bit short of time. So that's the first thing they do, they want to achieve. So what do? They actually go into mosques. Now it's social media, I'll come on to that. They will try and persuade through speeches, through media, through memes, through a whole bunch of different things. Your parents got it wrong. This is the right for Islam. That's the first thing. The second one is that they will set up organizations around civil society that will claim to represent different aspects of Islam and Muslims in the different countries. On the left-hand side, you might have people that, in youth clubs at university, they're a lot more passive. They will, some of the universities, in fact, most of the Islamic university societies, in reality, social elite, people, doctors, nurses, and a whole bunch of other people. On the right, people a bit more angry, a bit more political elite, more academic, and they will create umbrella organizations working through ISOCs or Islamic societies, the internet, universities, etc., politically, using negative victimization, fear, global relationships, excommunication, takfir. And on the right-hand side, the line where they will try and say that we are the true representatives of Muslims in our societies. Anybody who's not part of this group, in the US, CARE, ISNA, ICNA, a whole bunch of other people. In the UK, MCB, MAB, Jamaat Islam, a whole bunch of different organizations. They've been doing it for a long time. They will actually create these, and why and how are they able to do it? Point number 3, money from the Middle East. Now there's some issues around Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt not actually getting on with the Muslim Brotherhood. But they are the ones that actually, when the Muslim Brotherhood ran away from Egypt because they were about to be all arrested for the assassination of the president, etc., they joined the religious establishment in Saudi Arabia, and they set up 3 organizations: OIC, WAMI, World Assembly of Muslim Youth, and the Muslim World League. And with that, they spread around the world. The CIA, in an open source document I saw in 2005, said around about $80 billion had been spent by just one of those countries alone, one of the countries in the Middle East, on this. And by the way, why anti-Semitism? Because it's a quick, low-hanging fruit. It's become the opium of the masses. Something you could, and it doesn't always start with religion. Maybe you'll have some people telling you, oh, this Muslim scholar says this, Muslim scholar said that. Yeah, they do. But it doesn't always start with that. It starts with the concepts of social justice, Israel, Palestine. That's where it starts from. And then you see all of these other anti-Semitic tropes from Europe and now coming out from the Middle East. So how does that actually, if you remember Islamism, I said the 3 things they want to do. You'll see it through their boycotting of the Holocaust Memorial Day. You'll see it in these organizations. You'll see it in their senior members signing the Istanbul Declaration, for example, where senior members of the majority of the Western countries, Islamist organizations, their representatives went and signed a declaration that said that if Britain sent in peacekeeping troops, as the Prime Minister has said, when there was one of the sort of the times of troubles in the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, if Britain sends in troops, it's okay to attack British troops. And by the way, Jews really, because they all have this concept of aligning themselves with the IDF, with Israel, and they have to serve in the IDF, etc. Blah 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 blah. Jews are legitimate targets anywhere in the world. A lot of senior members who were having meetings with Tony Blair a few years before, having photographs taken, as seen as the gatekeepers, signed this declaration. So you'll see TV channels, we'll see mosques, some mosques, more and more mosques, schools, emails, WhatsApp, social media, SMS messages, cartoons, and I know that you're going to see some of those cartoons in these 2 weeks. Music, rap, universities, and in the anti-war activism. I once went to an iftar, and an iftar is when Muslims in Ramadan fast for 29 or 30 days, and it's a fast from sun up to sundown. An iftar is the breaking of the fast during the time of, when the sun's going down. And I was asked, and so different hat, I was once asked to go in and give a lecture on spirituality, because I'm in a Sufi order myself. And I was the keynote speaker. The 3 speakers before me, and the topic was spirituality. Wow, it's Ramadan, because fasting is not about, fasting is not, for Muslims, it's not about, what does it feel like for people who are poor? No, it's about learning how to control your ego. By not eating, by not drinking, by not having sex, all of these things are the basic things that an ego, the nafs, needs. If you can control them, it's training for a month for the rest of the year. That's what we were meant to go and talk about. The 3 speakers before me all spoke about Israel and Palestine. That's what's happening at universities. There is scriptural justification of anti-Semitism. It's there. It's there. There are apparently texts that actually justify taking hostile attitudes to Jews and people of the book. And I'll give you an example of one. The charter of Hamas talks about a hadith where it says that the end time will not come until there is a Jew hiding behind a rock or a stone, and the rock will say, "O son of Abdullah, there's a Jew hiding behind me, and you'll know where he is and chop his head off." That's a hadith. It is there. But if you take it as general and applicable today, and to describe people on their nature as opposed to what it actually means, you can take it the way that Hamas take them. And I'll come to the answer on how people have took it historically in the next slide. Then there are other things, passages from the Quran, that talk about take them not as friends and allies. Awliya is the Arabic word. They are but friends and allies of each other. That was specific. It wasn't about non-Muslims or people who weren't Muslim. It was specifically talking about somebody who happened to be of a different faith than the Muslims at the time. And you've got to read the whole rest of it. You've got Shakespeare analogy. You've got to read the whole thing and understand it before you can actually, if I could take a verse from any Shakespeare play and twist it to mean whatever I want. But you've got to understand what happened before, what happened afterwards. And by the way, the Quran really basically is storytelling. It's stories. That's what it is, along the way. Sorry?
2 minutes and take questions.
Do you want to finish?
No, it's up to you. 15 minutes left.
Okay, 15 minutes. Do you guys want me to just wrap up in 5 minutes and take 10 minutes questions? Yeah. Okay, let me just wrap up very quickly. Sorry, I didn't realise. Okay, the scriptural justification is there, and I can take a question that somebody wants. Online extremism, yeah, there's a huge problem. It's lowered the average age. It's increased participation of women, females, and it's not in itself an engine of radicalisation, but a forum. Negative measures, take it down, remove it. Get Facebook, Twitter, etc. But that doesn't work because they'll just set up another one. That's what's been happening. But if somebody's breaking the terms and conditions, you need to let the social media companies know. What do we need to do? Yes, we need takedowns. Empower counter-narratives. We're living in an age of narratives. We're not living in an age of arguments just around theology or academia. We're living in narratives. It's whoever creates the most powerful narrative is the one that will take the way forward. Far right, populist, regressive left, and Islamist conversions of messaging on social media. They have a symbiotic relationship. When the Christchurch attack happened, this thing in the middle, I want to call it a briefing, but I'm not, because that would actually give it too much credit, was something that originated on a white supremacist forum that basically said that the guy who carried out the attack was Jewish, trained by Mossad, all the usual blah, blah, blah. And by the way, if somebody wants some of these slides, you're more than welcome to have them afterwards. But it was also on Islamist websites, social media, WhatsApp. It was also on non-Islamist, and this is what really frustrates me. I'm a member of lots of non-Islamist WhatsApp groups, and people were sending me this. But it was also on the far left as well. Antisemitism, a journey of what happens when you report it to Facebook. I might take this slide out or hide it a little bit if you want to share them, because that will highlight somebody who I'm working on the left-hand side, a guy called Shah Faizan, who's not an Islamist. He's a Sufi. He's a goofy Sufi. He whirls and dances. That's what he does. But he's created a Facebook group. I'm in it. My son was in it until, and you'll see why he's not in a minute. My eldest son's 28. And he put up this usual thing, that ISIS al-Baghdadi is a Jewish Mossad agent. That happens to be my son, Haras Rafiq, on the left. I didn't even know he was going to do this. I just saw it. And he basically said, it's a shame you've got to post this, such a link in the Next Monday group. I see no correlation in the group for what it was set up for and conspiracy theories. Probably time I left the group. Peace out. They kicked him out of the group after he did that. But the reply from him, Shah Faizan, was, this group is against all kinds of terrorism and extremism. And then a guy called Dawood, who I know also, said, any way you look at it, it's all a Dajjalic Yahudi trick. Dajjalic means messianic or evil, and Yahudi obviously means Jewish. Dajjalic Yahudi trick, isn't it? Everything is. We're living in these times right. Inshallah, may Allah shelter us. Ameen. This was the date on here, June, just last month. I reported it to Facebook through not the way I would normally do it, because I have links into Facebook, just as an ordinary person. I got that response from Facebook. Thank you for reporting it. Your report is very important to us. But it doesn't break our terms and conditions and standards. If you don't like it, block him. That's what happened. We've got the propaganda war. People are focused on ISIS. And again, it's all about narrative. And this really, I wanted to talk about why is their propaganda so effective? One, by the way, two interesting pieces of reading. I can skip all these slides and you can read. On our website, one report called The Virtual Caliphate, which looks at the theory around this propaganda. The second one is documenting the virtual caliphate, which is where we monitored ISIS's official propaganda for 1 month of Shaban. And they were producing on average 38 unique pieces of propaganda, focusing on not the kind of things that we think they would focus on, but it was designed to catch a broad target, anti-establishment, using a lot of motifs. Technology obviously has grown, etc. And this is all in there. What do we need to do? Well, we need to celebrate examples of Jewish personalities in Islamic history, from an Islamic perspective. There was the concept of Israeliyat, where the Prophet, peace be upon him, said in a hadith, if there's something good from the Jews and Christians, take it. Use it. Be happy with it. And there were lots of things that were good from the Jewish traditions and the Christian traditions. And from the Jewish traditions, there was a tradition of Israeliyat. And a lot of people, want to get rid of that right now. I talk about it here. The Wahhabis and the Salafis, they expunge all of this. But it's there. It's there if you can read Arabic or if you can read Turkish or Farsi, it's there. There's unfortunately not a lot of it translated now. There needs to be more done between people who are slightly left of centre-right, centre-left, Muslim but not Islamist, with the Jewish communities. But be mindful of who you actually work with, that you don't legitimise them. A lot of groups will look just for legitimization. Oh, I'm working with such and such a person, therefore I must be good. Okay, but really, they're carrying on with what they're doing. Final slide. It's something I said, but that's not a photograph I chose, by the way. It's in something called Thought Economics, where Professor Vikas interviewed me, and he said, that I said, and I did say it, that currently this is not an ideological struggle between Muslims and non-Muslims. It's a struggle between good and evil. And it's not dependent upon what faith or none you practice. Similarly, if you guys don't get involved in this struggle, if I don't get involved in this struggle, if people don't get involved in this struggle, then it's only going to get worse than it is right now. And I'll stop there and take questions.
passages that you showed us outside the context in which they were written. And it's in the 20th century that we begin to see them.
Even the 19th century.
And so the solution you're suggesting is engagement between the groups to come to understand one another, step by step.
I think there is the intellectual. There has to be intellectual engagement. There has to be ideological engagement. There has to be social engagement. And by social, I mean do things together.
Can you give us examples of where that's happening now? For example, you know that happening in the States?
Okay, I can tell you about the UK a little bit. The problem is it's not happening enough. That's the problem. It needs to happen more. But there are, from a social perspective, two things. Social and spiritual. Spiritual is what I use, religious. There are some things, by the way, within Orthodox Judaism, people can only eat meat that's been kosher. Okay. And then obviously there are some people who are Jewish who don't believe that and will eat normal meat as well. Within the Islamic traditions, it's actually zabiha is a similar thing to slaughter. Zabiha is a slaughter. Half the Muslims will eat zabiha only, and half the Muslims won't. The people from the Middle East will eat people from non-zabiha slaughtered meat, providing the person who's feeding the meat, supplying the meat, is Christian or Jewish or people of the book. But the majority of people in this country are from Southeast Asia, and they will only eat zabiha. Okay. So in Manchester, near my hometown, there are two campaigns that I know that are where Muslims and Jews are working together, and this has led to them socializing together as well. And the campaigns were around. There's been talk of banning. I don't think it will happen, but there has been a lot of talk about banning kosher meat and also zabiha meat where the animal's not been stunned before. That's important to Muslims and Jews. And the other one around, there are some countries who, I don't know if they've done it already, but are thinking of banning male circumcision. It's done? Yeah. Right. Denmark, that's right. I knew it was Scandinavian. The country they were either looking to do it or they've done it. And there was again talk, there's a lot of lobbying here to actually do the same here. That's also important to Muslims. So these are two campaigns that Muslims and Jews could get together on. There's another one that could be around post-mortems, but I'm trying to figure out getting the right people to do it.
Some of the United States too, when Jewish cemeteries have been desecrated, the group that has shown up to help us scrub or clean are American Muslims.
Right.
The Pittsburgh shooting happened, the first American group that wasn't Jewish to show up and help raise money for funerals and guard the synagogue, etc., were American Muslims. So the things you're saying are starting to happen organically.
Yeah,
I agree that
but I think we can, as a society, we need to kickstart them a little bit as well. But again, be mindful. There's a group in the UK, Muslim Council of Britain, who boycott Holocaust Memorial Day, who will not condemn, say Hamas is a terrorist organization, Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. They will not condemn, and the things that actually happened, they will not, they'll go on with somebody and talk about Islamophobia in mosques, etc., and again in inverted commas, but will not condemn a depiction of a swastika on a synagogue. They would love to work with some Jewish organizations, and they've tried in the past, but then when their true forms have been revealed, the organizations have pulled away, and then there's been a new leadership, and then they've gone back. You have to understand, though, who the organization is, what they believe in, because you're not going to change that. But I agree, we need to do more. Any other questions? So I'm just being told I need to wrap up.
Can I just respond to him? Thank you so much for your question. There are two of us here who are very active in the American Jewish Committee. I am one of them, and I'm on the board of the American Jewish Committee. One of its most important imperatives is real, true interfaith dialogue that meets, throughout every year, every week. And I hope in your region, I know you're at Gettysburg, I think that there is something you can plug into. but I cannot, as a human being, I can tell you that my life was changed by such activities. And growing up as an observant Jew, I had less activity with people of all faiths. And as it's never too late, and it is psychologically just critically important, and it takes a great deal of work, a great deal of processing. It's not easy, but it is so worth it. So please check out American Jewish Committee.
You know, there's an organization in America called Masjid Muhammad. It's the largest American Muslim organization. Governments ignored them. Obama ignored them. Everybody seems to ignore them. It's 300 mosques, African American, from Waladdin Muhammad when he left the Nation of Islam and became more orthodox. A great I can put you in anybody wants to be in touch with their head. We're doing work with them. Really spiritual, really good guys. 300 mosques, as I said, around the US. They'll be happy to do stuff. Sorry, somebody put their hand up a minute ago before I spoke. Do you want me to wrap up? I've been told wrap up. Thank you.